This book covers mature topics. Please be aware of that amongst little ears. And please also take caution if you are sensitive to the topic of miscarriage, postpartum depression, psychosis. That is brought up in this book. So if this is something that you are sensitive to, please keep in mind this may not be something that you want to listen to. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy this review.
Hey everyone, I'm Erin, this is Poppy, and today we're going to talk about The Sweet Blue Distance by Sarah Donati. It's a historical fiction romance, so if you're into that kind of thing, you might be into this one. I was pleasantly surprised. I've never read anything by this author before, never heard of her. I picked the book up mainly because it has a horse on the cover, and anytime I see a book that has a horse on it, I'm always picking it up to see if the horse actually plays a role in the story. And I was pleasantly surprised that the horse does play a part, and it was so good. I was kind of blown away. It's probably some of the best writing I have read in quite some time, probably since I started reading the Outlander series. So if you're into Outlander, you might be into this one too. The romance is a part of the story, but it's not like the full story. It was just really refreshing to read, and it was also pretty insightful on what it was like in the mid to late 1850s. So yeah, there was a lot of historical elements to this book I didn't quite know much about. It takes place mainly in Santa Fe. So I didn't know much about the culture over there. So it was really cool to read. We'll get into more of the synopsis here, but for just introductory stuff, as I said, my name's Erin. This is Poppy. I know a lot of book people have cats. I also have cats, but I am allergic to them, so I don't hold them very much. I'm not allergic to chickens though, and I have a lot of chickens. They're my favorite animal, and Poppy here she is my satin silky. She's my baby girl. I pretty much raised her. She's very bonded with me and likes hanging out with me. She's so cute. She might talk. She might be a little shy. Sometimes she talks. Okay, so I'm just going to try to give a brief synopsis of this book. This book is 800 pages long. The book took turns I wasn't really expecting. It's kind of a lot to sum up, but basically this book is set in 1857. Our main character is Carrie Ballantyne. She's a young midwife and nurse, and she's been hired by a doctor in Santa Fe to travel from Manhattan, New York, all the way out to Santa Fe, which is a monstrously huge trip to make. A little bit of a backstory on Carrie. When she's a little girl, something really tragic happens to her and her family, and she loses her father. So her mother remarries another doctor who's an affluent old family friend, and so they live a decently good life in Manhattan, New York. But Carrie never really adjusts to the city. And she's kind of haunted still to this day by the death of her father, among some other kind of traumatic things that happened to her that, interestingly, the way that the book is written, it doesn't really get into the other parts of Carrie's childhood that were traumatic until a little bit later on. It insinuates some things, but it kind of makes you be like, well, what happened that was so bad? So that actually kind of piqued my interest, because normally when you read, well, I don't want to say normally, but a lot of the books that I read kind of trauma dump. So they give you the character's sob story and right off the bat, right out of the starting gate. So I think this book is interesting because it doesn't do that. It implies there's trauma involved, but it doesn't hyperfixate on that, and it doesn't make you feel like you need to immediately feel pity and bad for Carrie. So when Carrie is 15 years old, she starts a midwife apprenticeship, which I think about that now and I'm like, that's crazy that they would start doing these apprenticeships when they were that young. While Carrie does her midwifery apprenticeship, she also then goes into a nursing program so that way she can better help more patients. Smart move. So she's been working for 6 years at the New Amsterdam Charity Hospital, and she gets this letter from one of her higher ups, and it's a doctor. His name's Dr. Markham. He lives all the way out in Santa Fe, and he's requesting for a midwife and nurse to join his practice. And so this immediately piques her interest. There's kind of a robust set of unique things that Carrie needs to do. She needs to be able to ride a horse, and she needs to be able to ride well, because she's gonna have to travel there, but then also she's going to have to be able to travel to go out and see her patients. She needs to be able to handle firearms. She needs to learn how to speak Spanish, hands down. She can't get away from it. She's going all the way out to Santa Fe. So most of the patients that she's going to be dealing with have no English whatsoever. That's non-negotiable. Most importantly, she's also going to need to be able to learn about the Pueblo nations, their cultures, and then be able to assist and help them without assumptions or prejudices. Carrie feels like she's very qualified for this because she has a bit of an interesting family life. Her biological father I believe it was his sister married into a Mohawk family. So Carrie growing up spent a lot of time with a Mohawk tribe and had like family members that were from the Mohawk tribe. So she has a great appreciation for that culture and a respect, and she doesn't feel that as a white woman she has to colonize them or make them more like her. And so that's really cool. So she thinks like I would actually fit into this really well. She loves riding horses. She's adventurous. She wants adventure. She doesn't want to live in the city. So she sends this doctor her credentials, and she gets the job. She doesn't get to Santa Fe until I think it's like halfway through the book. So, and it's an 800-page book, mind you. So like a big chunk of this book is the journey to get to Santa Fe. And I know like some people said they thought the book read really slow. I have to disagree with that because first she travels to Baltimore, and then from there she has to get on a train. Then you get to learn what it was like to travel on a train. And then from there she gets to Missouri, and then she's riding a steamboat to the next port. So she has to ride a steamboat. And then the steamboat, I didn't really know much about traveling on steamboats. So this actually gives some like background information on what that was like. It's just like really fascinating. I don't know. I had a good time with every part of this book and the travel. Last part of the trip is on a stagecoach. Long story short, she is like 5 days into this trip and she's hating it because being stuck inside a stagecoach sounds like literal hell. 3 men show up and they've been hired by Dr. Markham to basically expedite her trip to get her to Santa Fe faster because her midwife services are needed faster than anticipated. She gets to Santa Fe and then she hits the ground running, and her whole point of coming to Santa Fe is like ripped out from underneath her feet. Like her role changes as soon as she gets there. It is quite wild. So there's romance in the book. It's not the most prominent part of the story. I would say it plays a pretty decent role in it because her love interest, he's a main character too. But the romance I found to be like very refreshing, and we'll get into all of that. But I'm trying to give as brief of an outline as I possibly can before we get into more specifics. But that's the gist of it. K-pops. K-pop. K-pop. Ooh. Look at your little face. You're so cute. You've been a good girl. My hand hurts from holding you like that. I'm gonna say hello. I'm gonna say you've been so quiet. Do you want your snacky? Yes. Poppy's snack is dried mealworms in a fancy little tent cup. Please don't tip that over. Oh gosh, Poppy. Oh gosh, Poppy. You're getting them everywhere. Can you just peck a little slower and you won't fling them? So yeah, this is it. This is a sweet blue distance. It's great. I love it. So as you can see, I made a lot of notes. It's kind of funny because when I first sat down to read it, I was mainly just reading it for kicks and giggles. And I think I was like 10 pages into the book and I was like, oh, I'm gonna really like this. So again, if you liked Outlander, you're probably gonna like this. Just saying. I feel like Outlander's very dramatic. I think this feels a little bit more like real life. It's got drama in it because of the fact that it takes place in a tumultuous time in history, but it just feels a little bit more realistic. So let's get into it. The way that this book starts out, I found it really cool. At first I was worried when I picked it up because I thought this entire book was going to be that it was like written in letter format, and then I was like really really happy to see that that wasn't the case. But like the first part one of the book is just called correspondence. It's literally the letters that were sent to Carrie and the correspondence back and forth between when Carrie was talking to Dr. Markham about being hired. I enjoyed reading that. I think it helps bring the reader into the world of like, we are back to, this is way back. Like we're writing letters, and this level of correspondence would take like months to figure out. The second part of the book, it's a couple chapters worth of Carrie writing in her diary as she's traveling. And it's nice because it gives you an opportunity to hear what Carrie's character and her voice sounds like. So like one part that I thought was cool in the first part here, she's on this train. This was like, again, something I had never really thought about, but the train that she's on, there's like 2 cows that are on the train tracks. When they hit the cows, it jolted the train so badly that people got like severely injured. Okay, granted, there aren't any seat belts at the time, so like if you're walking, through the train and then it collides with something, like you're gonna fly. But it was just interesting to read like the level of injury that happened. It said here, the worst was Mr. Hennessy, the inventor I mentioned previously, who struck his head so severely that his skull fractured. His prognosis is dire. There were also 2 others, an elderly woman and a 10-year-old grandson. She broke her left hip and the boy his left tibia. He also bit his tongue so hard that he may well lose part of it. These 3 were taken away by carriage with Dr. Gordon attending. That was just really interesting to read because I was like, holy crap, like I had no idea you could get that injured from the train just hitting a couple cows that were on the tracks. It just puts you in the story and it gives you details that show you what life was like back then. Very early on, we meet Eli Ibarra, who is the love interest. The author doesn't say that, like right off the bat, that Carrie or Eli find each other attractive. The way that she writes them is it's more, they share brief glances and stuff like that, and it applies like that they're interested in one another, but without, spelling it out. And again, I thought that was kind of fun to read because it was like, kind of like made me giggle. I'm like, oh, I see what's happening here. So yeah, Eli gets injured as well. Carrie has to treat him. I think he messes up his wrists and he might have a slight concussion of some sort. So we get to meet him pretty early on and kind of hear her thoughts on Eli. Carrie remarks that Eli Ibarra is much like our Uncle Gabriel, despite the difference in age. He is very strongly built, but lithe, a capable individual who speaks very little and sees everything. And the other funny thing about this book is that again, it doesn't like explicitly say right off the bat that like Carrie has the hots for Eli or vice versa. It just gently implies it, and I like that. It was just fun to read. It kind of made me giggle a little bit. And also, like, everybody wants, like every character I feel in the story wants Eli and Carrie together. One of Eli's brothers, actually, he has the hots for Carrie, and he like makes that known very well. Eli's like very quietly like, I'm also attracted to her, but I don't want to let anybody know that I am attracted to her because nobody will leave me alone if that's the case. So he's like a little bit more stoic on that front, but it's just fun to read. When Carrie is writing in her diary, she writes, Mr. Ibarra has an expressive face, but is not a conversationalist. He listened, nodded, thanked me, and turned back to his brothers, but I stopped him to ask if he happened to also speak Spanish. So as Carrie is traveling, she's asking people like, hey, can you help me learn Spanish? So she's smart. She's smart. She's been prepping for this trip, She's ready to go. Part 3 is called Westward, and this is where we get into like the actual story. At this point, we're about close to 50 pages into the book. Hey, Pops, how are your mealworms? Are you having a good time? You're making a mess. I'm gonna have to vacuum in here. Just like, I don't care. I'm a princess. She's being so quiet. Want to say hi? No, she's too busy eating. Oh, there's a little bit. Oh, bless you. So I'm not going to go chapter by chapter because, again, this book is 800 pages long. I already am getting anxious right now. I'm feeling like, how am I possibly going to give a good idea for this book without talking for 8 hours? Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening to me chit-chat about books. Right off the bat, I believe we've just arrived in St. Louis. Carrie and Nathan, her brother, they're traveling together. So Nathan is her co-pilot. He's keeping her safe because it's a long trip. We are in a hotel and there's a wedding party downstairs, and the opening line of the chapter is, Carrie had just dropped off asleep when the tuba woke her. And I'm like, yeah, that draws me in. That's a nice starting sentence. It took a moment to remember where she was, a very elegant hotel room in St. Louis, and to make sense of the tuba. The other instruments began warming up. She reminded herself that if she got out of bed now, she might not get any sleep at all. To be drawn downstairs would be a decidedly irrational thing to do. Nathan comes up to grab Carrie, and he's like, you hear that music downstairs, right? Like, we gotta go. Turns out this music is coming from a wedding party, and they basically crashed this wedding party, which I thought was kind of funny. Apparently, Nathan and Carrie are both like, they love dancing. That's like their thing. Carrie especially loves dancing. This is when she kind of comes alive. This is when she lets loose. And so it was just kind of cute to read her brother like coming together and be like, you hear that, right? Let's go. They go down and they dance, let loose a little. And this is kind of where you see a little more relaxed side of Carrie. Eli shows up. Nathan notices, because he's an observant man, that Carrie is watching Eli come in. The wheels start to turn immediately and he's like, okay, I'm keeping this in mind. Eli shows up and he has this really beautiful young woman that's on his arm, and Carrie's immediately like, oh, that's clearly his wife. And we're all like, boo. This turns out to be Eva, and she is actually a good friend of Eli's. She is a widow. Her deceased husband was one of Eli's best friends. Naturally, as they're traveling, like Eli, he takes care of Eva and is a friend to her. And that is known right off the bat. There's no weird love triangle. There is no like Eva trying to get Eli. Like, it seems to me that Eva is very content with being a widow. Like, she's okay. And that Eli is just a friend. So I was like, thank you, author, for not making this like stupid drama. Eli tells Nathan that he's not married to Eva. She's just a friend. And Nathan challenges Eli to tell Carrie that himself, which that made me chuckle, because Nathan's like, I don't know why you're sharing with me like your love life, because what do I care? But Carrie might care. Then later that evening, Carrie is haunted by a reality turned nightmare with her father's tragic death. So it goes into how he was killed. She wonders, like, why do I have these dreams about my dad? Why is it that he's almost like haunting me? Like, is there a message he's trying to give me? So we move into some of Eli's POV. He and his brothers are from a family of sheep ranchers. So they were on their way back to Santa Fe. They crossed the Atlantic to go buy a specific type of sheep and bring them back to the United States, and take them all the way back out to Santa Fe. So that's a really big trip. Eli hasn't been a sheep rancher in about a decade. He instead is a surveyor and a cartographer, so he's trained in that, and that's what he primarily does, but he went along with his brothers as an extra set of hand. Eli's brother, Jules, he's been making eyes at Carrie, but apparently Jules falls in love with every pretty face that he sees, so Eli is just kind of like, yeah, whatever. But Eli's the one he's also been taken with Carrie. She's described as beautiful, but not in like an overly obnoxious way. Again, the writing is more subtle, and you can imply she's attractive based off of how the people around her perceive her. And then it's pretty cute because in this POV, we see Carrie on the train platform. He watches her take off her bonnet and start smacking Nathan with it. And like, this is described as basically the moment where he was intrigued by her, because Eli is attracted to strong, opinionated, educated women. Come on, he's not intimidated by her. Like, in a way, he's intimidated by her because he knows how strong she is, but that immediately off the bat, he's like, ooh, a strong woman. Yeah, right, Pops? We get a lovely description of Carrie's physical features. All on the platform, people pivoted to follow her with their eyes. She's boarding our train, Jules said, his voice gone rough. Eli's heartbeat starts to pick up a little bit when he notices that Carrie is also on his train. Mo tells Jules and Eli that he's like, hey, guess what? This girl, she's a midwife and nurse, and she's traveling from here all the way to Santa Fe to become midwife. And Eli's like blown away by this because, that's where he lives. So super exciting. At this point, Eli and Carrie have actually been traveling together from Baltimore to St. Louis. And so he's had some opportunities to talk with her. One thing he said that he noticed about her was she challenged him, asked questions, listened to answers, and voiced opinions. And he found that attractive. When we're on to chapter 3, we finally are on board the Annabelle. So the book actually shows a map of the journey that Carrie took. Pretty wild to think that, to realize that like people traveled so heavily on these steamboats. We're back in Carrie's POV. She's standing behind this woman that's incredibly beautiful and very fashionable, and no husband in sight. When she turns her head slightly, Carrie realizes that this is the same woman that Eli had on his arm the night before, and she's like, So a detail that made me chuckle a little bit is they're loading onto the steamboat, and they're watching the roustabouts getting the livestock loaded onto the boat, and Carrie makes a note that there's no sheep. There's no sheep. She doesn't see any sheep being loaded onto the steamboat. And she's kind of disappointed because she knows that Eli and his brothers have a bunch of sheep, and she was hoping that maybe they were all going to the same place too. At this point, obviously, she doesn't realize that Eli's on this boat. This part really blew my mind with the descriptions of the steamboat itself. The brochure about the Annabelle hadn't prepared Carrie for the surprise of the main saloon. draped from top to bottom and end to end in crimson red. It was enough to make a person dizzy. Brocade and velvet upholsteries and draperies, all of it festooned with gold braid and tassels. So we meet Mrs. Ashby. This is the captain's wife, and she is as petty and shallow as you would expect. So we don't really like her. When she realizes that Carrie isn't somebody of like upper class, so to speak, she's like super dismissive and rude towards Carrie. And Carrie's just kind of like, in this part, we get a little backstory on Carrie's stepfather, Dr. Quinlan, and it's clear that Carrie and her brother Nathan both really respect their stepfather. And I enjoyed reading that too, because I wasn't really sure if this is going to be one of those things where like all these characters were horrible, but I think reading like a step parent as being like a respectable person was just nice to read for a change. Dr. Quinlan has given Carrie this book on the Santa Fe Trail in hopes to give her an idea of like the perils and stuff that she's going to see as she's traveling. And inside the book is a little drawing of her cat from back home that her mom did. And I really liked this detail because it just showed Carrie's mom, and it gives like a little bit of background that she's a very successful artist. Carrie misses her deeply, and like she says that home is wherever her mom is, so she's feeling very lonesome, but it was just a nice detail that gave some more depth to these characters. Carrie is getting ready to go out to eat dinner on this boat the first night that they're there, and she quickly realizes like how underdressed she is, and that's like a really relatable feeling when you're just like, but what would I wear? So Carrie sits down for dinner, and as she's like hyper fixated on the fact that she's underdressed. And then she looks up and Eli walks in and he has Eva on his arm again. And Carrie is like, she like slides her look to Nathan and she's like, you traitor. You're like, you knew he was going to be on this boat and you didn't tell me. Had she known Eli was on board, she would have just stayed in her stateroom and not come down to dinner. So like, because she wants to avoid him, which again, I think this is cute. And then, Eli and Nathan, they greet each other like they're just the best of friends. So this leaves Carrie to have to talk to Eva. Due to Eva's last name, it's pretty clear she and Eli are not married, and Carrie kind of breathes a sigh of relief. At first, Carrie and us as the readers, we don't want to like Eva. We're thinking of her as like, this girl's competition. She's gonna like complicate things, and we're gonna have this weird love triangle, and nobody wants to deal with that. Thank God. That becomes so clear so early on that Eva is not that, and I was so relieved by the fact that Eva is amazing. She's another like really quick-witted individual but she's very firm and holds herself with dignity and also calls people out on their BS. She quickly becomes somebody that you're like, we love her, protect her at all costs. There's a minor character that we deal with in this part of the book, Mrs. Hamlin, and I, in my notes, referred to her as an insufferable old bird. She knows Eva and she knows Eli. So small world connections, really. Like, can you imagine like traveling these like monstrous distance and like running into people who know things about you? That would, oof. But basically Mrs. Hamlin is like an absolute racist. I say throw her overboard. In the bin. We don't want to deal with women like that. So early on in this book, and this made me giggle too. I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but Eli likes to wink at Carrie. And I think it's adorable. After this dinner, Carrie berates Nathan for keeping Eli's presence a secret from her. He's like, sister, I'm worried that you're going to be this old spinster. I want you to find somebody to spend your life with. So, his intentions are good. He just wants his sister to find love. This ship is much like the Annabelle. This ship has set sail. So everybody's basically gunning for these two to get together. We get to interact with Beto. That's Eva's little son. And he's charming and intelligent, and I love him. Because Eva is from Santa Fe, she provides Carrie like some background on the doctor that she's going to work for. And nobody really has anything that fantastic to say about Dr. Markham. So we get this like ominous feeling that what is Carrie walking into? And Carrie takes the information for what it is. I like that she's not asking for people to tell her gossip and fabricated stuff. She just wants some context so she knows what she's getting into. She understands that some people can embellish and make up things, but for her, she's like, I just want to know a little bit of what I'm coming into and how I can better handle this when I'm met with it. Shortly into this trip on the Annabelle, there's a family that comes down with probably like a food poisoning type situation. Mrs. Ashby, the captain's wife, all of a sudden decides that, oh, Carrie is worth her time and actually maybe a useful individual. So Carrie has to go and help this family, and she does. And straight up, she saves this family because they were going to die from dehydration. Hey, Pops, you've been so good. You clean your tootsies? Oh, she talks. There was like this little cute, wholesome moment between Eli, Beto, and Carrie. Eli talks a little bit about his family, and Beto is filling in details and information. I love this because it shows Eli has respect for kids, but he also understands them and gets along with them very well. Beto put a hand on Ibarra's wrist, but you haven't told the most important part. With great gravitas, he explained to Carrie, Uncle Eli has a telescope and a zenith sector and a transient instrument and, whoa, Eli Ibarra said, holding up one hand, palm out. Miss Ballantyne has got no need for a full inventory, Beto. And what will you do if she asks you to explain to her what a zenith sector is? I just like being like, whoa, hey, hang on, Beto. And also very cute, Beto agrees to be Carrie's Spanish tutor, and I think it's cute that they form a friendship that way. Carrie is able to get this family that had the food poisoning. She gets them back to health. Great job. We love her for that. Moving on. The steamboat has to stop to get repairs made to it. Another part of steamboat travel that I never considered. They pull into a port and everybody's allowed to basically get off the ship and explore the town that they've stopped in. So Eli, Nathan, and Carrie, as a little trio, they all go out to explore. Eli takes them out to the bluff and he starts talking about all the local tribes that live there, and Carrie listens in and she's very interested in learning these things. On their way back to the steamboat, they notice that there is another steamboat that is like on fire, and they watch it explode. Like all these people are like jumping off the boat and into the water. All three of them jump into problem-solving mode. Eli and Nathan take off, start swimming out to these people to save them. Carrie rushes into town to see if she can help the injured people that are most definitely going to be coming in. But the police officer that she talks to is kind of like nonchalant about it, and apparently, like this kind of stuff happens all the time. So they had 3 doctors and I believe like a few other nurses on board anyway, and so they didn't need her services. So Carrie's like freaking out because Nathan and Eli just ran off to go help these people, and she wants to help too, but like she's not needed. And because of this explosion, the Annabelle moved upstream to a different dock. And so Carrie's been like left behind. She takes the ferry up very reluctantly. She's an anxious mess, and I do not blame her. Like this whole scenario would be very terrifying. The day ticks by and she's begging the captain, like, can you please keep waiting? Like Eli and Nathan aren't back yet. Finally, the captain has to say, like, I can't wait for them any longer because I can't put anybody that much further behind. They have to unfortunately move on. But he tells her, like, if there's anybody who's resilient enough to find his way to the next port, it's Eli. We're left with that hope and terrified that something is going to go wrong. So Carrie stays in her stateroom that night to avoid speculation over Nathan's fate, because I don't blame her, because like all these, from what I've just like gathered, all these rich people, all they want to do is just like talk crap. And so Carrie is like, I don't want to sit there and have somebody tell me like, oh, my so-and-so was involved in something like this and they got blown to smithereens. Like she's traumatized from how she lost her father, and she's terrified she's going to lose Nathan and Eli, because, he's in on this too. Naturally, she's just trying to like distract herself and like keep herself from thinking about them. They finally reach Westport. This is the last stop for the steamboat. And so Carrie is out on the deck and she's eagerly, like she's scanning the crowd that's gathered. And she's trying to find Nathan and Eli in the crowd. She doesn't see them. And she's like, again, like as we're reading this, the way that it's written, it makes you feel the anxiety that Carrie feels. So she and Eva go back and they sit in the saloon, hopefully waiting for Nathan and Eli to come back up onto the boat. At last, Nathan walks in and he's grinning from ear to ear, and he walks right up to Carrie, tries to give her a hug, and he's like covered in filth. Carrie's like so relieved to see her brother. And then beyond him, standing in the doorway, is Eli. He stayed where he was in the doorway, leaning against the door frame, arms folded high on his chest, one leg crossed in front of the other, his gaze fixed on her, and winked. Just like, it made me giggle. We're on to the next part of the trip. This is the stagecoach. This is one of my favorite parts. So they're getting ready. Nathan says, girl, you need a horse. And I'm like, yeah, we're gonna go buy a horse. I'm so excited for this. I am an equestrian. I don't have a horse right now. If you notice in the background, that is my Australian stock saddle that I bought 2 summers ago. I bought it because I wanted that saddle, and it fits me. Hopefully whatever horse I get, it'll fit. I'm trying to manifest, you know what I mean? Like, I'm trying to say, like, I got this saddle, and I'm just hoping that one day I have a horse to put that on. But in the meantime, it's been living in my office and it smells really good, so it's a nice little prop for right now. So as an equestrian, I was like, yeah, we're gonna talk about horses. Yeah. Hey, you doing all right there, sweetheart? Oh, she's falling asleep. You doing okay, Pops? I've just been loving having you in here. You're so sweet. Anyway, so we're moving on to one of my favorite parts of the book. They're gonna go buy horses. Eli has a connection with a breeder in Westport. His name is Don Esteban. The reason why he has this connection is because his older sister, Madeline, is married to Don's son. He puts in a good word for Carrie and Nathan to get horses from this guy because he doesn't just like sell them to anybody. They go to his farm. This man breeds Argentinian horses. Technically today they're referred to as Criollos, and they're like a smaller horse. They don't get typically too tall, but they're known for their stamina and endurance. And they're like really beautiful horses. Like they're really compact, not super stocky. I don't know if that's quite the right explanation for them, but I think they have a lot of resemblance to Arabian. There's probably a lot of Arabian horse in their, Arabian horses make up pretty much the foundation of like so many different breeds of horses. Nathan ends up getting a blue roan, which I was like, woohoo, I love blue roans. And Carrie ends up getting a sorrel mare with flaxen mane and tail. And her name is Mimosa, and I thought that was super cute. This is like a family affair. This family that breeds these horses, they love their horses. They basically invite Nathan and Carrie in like family members, and so like they have a dinner together. So Carrie gets to meet Madeline, Eli's sister. She immediately recognizes like there's strong resemblance between Eli and his sister, and it's super cute because we see all of Eli's little nephews. They come running out of a house and they like tackle him, and I'm like, my heart can't handle the adorableness. I freaking love it. And it's cute. They join everybody, like they all sit down for a meal together and they're telling stories. And Carrie, at this point, she's learned enough Spanish that she can actually follow the conversation pretty decently. It's nice to read about like the progress that she's made. While they're sitting around having this meal, one of Eli's nephews says to her, why didn't you bring your own horse? Like, why do you have to take Mimosa? One of the older brothers to this little guy is like, you like all the horses, like don't just ignore him. He's attached to every horse. He's very sentimental, and he tells Carrie like he's going to miss Mimosa. And then Carrie talks about her horse Pearl that she had back in New York. And Carrie says, like, that's totally normal to be sentimental and miss a horse that you've raised and trained. Then he says, then you are like me. Carrie was aware of the fact that Don Esteban and Doña Teresa were watching her closely, but she kept her gaze on the young boy who was looking to her for a hint of understanding. I am sentimental about Pearl, she said. I like to think of her as comfortable and thoroughly coddled, and I make no apologies for that. Eli Ibarra made a deep sound in his throat. His expression was almost severe, but his tone was even when he spoke to Carrie directly. And why would you need to do that? Carrie managed to smile. I don't follow. Why would I need to what? To apologize. He was looking at her with such intensity that it felt like a touch. Madeline said, there is a saying, tender-hearted does not mean weak, just the opposite. I'm like reading this, I'm like, I'm my gas. I'm gonna cry, I'm gonna cry. At the end of this interaction with Don Esteban and his family, Nathan asks Eli, like, oh, well, do you have any of your own horses? And then Don Esteban starts laughing, and he goes, he has 3 of them. So we love a man who has good taste in horses, and I loved it. I was like, this is right up my alley as a horse person. Sweetheart, you okay? Just like, sit nappy time? After their meal that they share together as a family, they all go out and they go on a trail ride, and Eli says to Nathan, she is a born horsewoman, your sister. Remarkable. Thanks, Pops. She is, Nathan agreed, and more than that, she has a sixth sense when it comes to most animals. Eli didn't hide his surprise. You'll see for yourself, Nathan explained. Carrie knows horses. She could spot laminitis or a sore forelock. A sore forelock. That's supposed to say, that's a typo. That's supposed to be fetlock. Yeah. It's supposed to say a sore fetlock or a bad tooth or colic coming on. A forelock is basically horse's bangs. That's the part of the mane that comes down on the front of their face. A fetlock, it's the part of the horse's foot. That makes more sense. Your foot, okay. And she tends to them? She does, and she's had good success. The simple truth is she likes horses better than people. You'll rarely see her smile like she smiled today when she mounted Mimosa. Eli gave a huff of laughter. What? Nathan prompted. You plan on making her smile yourself? Eli wheeled around and took off at a lope. It wasn't until the ranch came into view that he pulled up. He sat looking at Nathan for a long minute, his expression grim. Once you turn back for home, you won't need to worry about her. I'll keep an eye out. That's good to know, Nathan said. But I think you'll find that Carrie is very good at taking care of herself. It's so swoony. It's so swoony. So for people who don't know anything about horses, lameness is a term for when a horse does not walk sound, aka if they are limping. And that can be from a whole number of injuries or even like health issues. And colic is probably like one of the biggest things that kills horses. Horses don't throw up, so if they have like any type of obstruction in their intestinal tract, it causes them, like it's a blockage and it will kill them. So Carrie is able to, she can spot the signs for colic as well, and then she's treated her horses for that, and I thought that was really cool, and again made me like Carrie more because she's a horsewoman. And then immediately after this we get this is such a short chapter, but I thought, I don't know, it was very cinematic. I love the way it's written. Carrie wakes up sometime really early in the morning, and this is the night before they're leaving to get on the stagecoach. The roof is leaking, so it's like leaking on her face. So she wakes up from that. She stands up and she goes over and for some reason, she goes over and looks out the window. Just then, a man on horseback leading 2 more mounts came into view. Odd, at this hour of the night. Her pulse picked up as he stopped in the light of the lamps that hung to either side of the hotel's front door. And now she recognized the horse he rode, an Argentinian he called Sombra. It was Eli Ibarra, sitting there in the streaming rain for no apparent reason. His head came up and the light touched his face as his gaze moved from one window to the next, as if he knew she would be there, waiting to be seen. When he caught sight of her, he stilled. Carrie's breath stuttered. She should step away from the window, but instead she studied him. His hat, broad-brimmed and low-crowned, was mostly hidden beneath the hood of a gutta percha cloak spread out around him. Brass-studded leather glove with high gauntlets. In the shadows, she could make out the shape of a rifle scabbard, a coil of rope, a canteen, saddlebags, a bedroll. The other 2 horses stood in shadow, but she knew them, both Argentinians, a mare and another gelding. And that made sense. He had left his 3 horses with the Romero family while he traveled to Europe. In the few seconds it took for her to see all this, his gaze never moved from her face. A man about to set out on a long journey, 800 miles over plains and desert and mountains. There was nothing between them beyond polite conversation, a few smiles and the occasional wink of an eye. But now he sat below her window in the hammering rain and observed her without excuse or apology. The only reaction Carrie could summon up to this old situation was the warm hum of curiosity. He raised his right hand and pointed 2 fingers at her in a gesture ripe with meaning. She said, I see you too. As if he could hear her, Eli Ibarra broke into a wide smile, turned Sombra's head, and moved off. Carrie watched him disappear into the night. I read that and I got chills. It's so pretty. It's so pretty. It's so cinematic, and it just made you feel things, you know. I love the detail of him just saying, pointing his fingers like this. I really love the line "I see you" because it richly implies somebody seeing you for more than just what, you know, like the surface level of who you are. And there's like something really intimate about that, and it's like one of my favorite parts of this book. If anything, just read it for that. Just read it for that. Like, all right, okay, we're gonna just try to cruise through this because okay, again, I've said it before, it's an 800-page book. I've been recording for probably like 4 hours at this point. So we're moving on from this super wholesome interaction. It's like this is a symbol of the fact that they're now heading into a different part of their relationship now too. Let's go! It's stagecoach time. We get an introduction to Canty Chatham, and she's horrible. Poppy, don't tip over your teacup, honey. You're tipping over the teacup. You're tipping it over. You're tipping it over. Okay. Why don't you sit? There. So we meet Canty Chatham. She is going to become a problem later on in the book. Spoiler alert, but you know, here we go. An important note to be mindful of with Mrs. Chatham is that she doesn't like children. And the person who makes this statement is Beto, the child. He straight up is like, she does not like kids. Keep that in mind. And again, this writing is so immersive. So as they start out on the wagon train. The writing gives you just nice details on like what that felt like. As she had imagined, many people chose to walk beside their wagons rather than endure the torture of riding in a dark, hot wagon bed over the roughest road. The price to be paid for the freedom of movement, one of the prices, came in the form of road dust raised by wheels and hooves that hung in the air and draped itself over the quick and the dead. Soon, some of these people would be coughing until their lungs rattled. They get into a bit of like a tussle, if you will, with this Canty Chatham lady, because she's just a real piece of work. And they end up like calling her out. She's like super rude to Beto for just talking, because again, she hates kids. So they like basically kind of tease her and call her out on it. And they're pretty blunt with her. And she gets so offended by their bluntness that by the next day, she's already joined a different wagon train and is gone. And they're like, good riddance. I love this. So this little detail made me laugh. I was like, oh my gosh. So turns out Mimosa the horse has a dog. There's a dog, his name is Chico, and he was bonded with Mimosa, and he just goes wherever Mimosa goes. So Carrie's like riding along, and this dog that she saw back when they bought the horses, this dog is there. And she's like, where the heck did this dog come from? And Eli informs her that this dog is bonded to Mimosa. It's her dog. And so now Carrie has a dog as well. 5 days into the journey, Eli shows up and he goes and gets Carrie. She's in the wagon and he travels by horseback. So he comes up to Carrie and says like, hey, there's 3 men here that have been hired to specifically come and get you and take you to Dr. Markham faster than what you would be able to if you just rode the wagon train the whole way there. So this is where Titus Hardy comes in. He is the head of this group of men that has come to collect Carrie. They give her some time to think about this because she's kind of like, traveling with 3 men, I'm a woman, like there's risks involved there. Like they could get attacked, she could get abducted, killed, what have you. She agrees, after some debating, she agrees with Nathan that she will go with these 3 men, and Nathan's going to stay behind with Eva and Roberto to protect them and help them with the rest of the journey. However, Eli is going to go along with Carrie, so it's a nice little deal, a little time. They get to know each other better. Hi, puppy. She's scratching her beak. This part of the story with Eli and Carrie being able to travel together, it gives them the perfect excuse to kind of get to know each other better without like Nathan around, hovering around. Eli learns more about Carrie's Mohawk family background connections. He says to himself that he can't deny that there's definitely an attraction forming there, which is like, dude, duh. With the immersive writing, we get a scene where 2 wagons have capsized in this creek, and they see these people like scrambling to try and get it out, and these people, they've lost everything. There's really nothing that can be done. And Carrie immediately, she wants to like stop what they're doing, stop this journey to go over and help them. All the men kind of remind her, they're like, there's really not much we can't do anything for them. It is really survival of the fittest out here. Then there's this really cute interaction between Carrie and Eli. So that night they're sitting around their campfire and they're eating. Miguel, one of the other guys, is asking about Chico, the dog. And then they tell Miguel, oh, that's Mimosa's dog. She came with him. Miguel's like, what the heck, Eli, why didn't you get a dog when you got your 3 horses from the same people? Eli jokingly responds back that, well, technically now he does have a dog. And then he like winks at Carrie. And I'm just like, the boldness of implying, he's so bold that he's like into her. And I love it. I love to see it. He's like, well, no, I do have a dog now because like we're just going to end up together anyway. So I ate this up. And it's nice so the event, again, this part of the journey is cool because Carrie is getting to know her horse better and they're forming a bond, and that's super cute to see. And I like that the author included this because I like that, like, obviously the horse isn't a main character of the story, but she's not left out. She's still, in my opinion, a character. And it makes you feel more invested in the story, and you feel more connected to what these people are all going through. Carrie proves that she is an easy woman to travel with, and rightfully so. She's not fussy, but she overhears one night Titus, the leader of this group of men. Apparently he's like saying that she wouldn't make a good wife because she's unflinching in her opinions. She's a strong woman. She's observant, silent, but also willing to speak up when she needs to. And he says few men would want such a wife. except for Eli. At one point, Carrie asks Eli about his being a cartographer, and instead of like mansplaining things to her or like treating her like, oh, it's not anything that you would know anything about, instead he goes to his saddlebags, he pulls out a map that he made of the area that they're in, and he shows her specifically, like, this is where we're at on this trail, and this is where we're going. I loved this detail because he's, just like she's shown him parts of herself, he's now showing parts of himself to her, and I think that's really beautiful. So after this super cute, wholesome moment of them talking, Rainey puts his hand into a fire ant nest and gets bit like over 43 times or something like that. So then Carrie starts taking care of him like she would, and she makes a poultice out of wild plum bark. She's just kind of hoping this will work. But I wrote a note in here that apparently Chico has decided that Carrie and Eli are his people, so even the dog is shipping these two at this point. Eli gets flirty with Carrie, and they share their first kiss, and I like Eli as a character a lot. He asks her, what is it that's making you so nervous? He was trying to get a rise out of her, and succeeding. She leveled her most disapproving look at him, but his slow shake of the head and that lopsided smile made it almost impossible to look at him directly. I'm not nervous. Now you're telling tales. There was something odd about his voice, low and rough, like the touch of a calloused finger. She began to turn away, but his hand closed around her wrist, and she knew that she was caught out. As gentle as his grasp was, now he would know. He could feel the frantic thrumming of her pulse and see the sheen of perspiration on her brow, just as she could, if she cared to, count his eyelashes. He was so close that she could smell gun oil on the hand that came up to cup her face. She raised her gaze to his and let him see that she was not afraid. But the funny part is, so it must have been just like it's implied that it's really just like a really quick peck. Maybe even just lip touching, like not even a kiss. And Carrie straight up is like, if that was a kiss, that was really underwhelming. So she's like, disappointed that this was a kiss. Anyway, we'll get back to that. They stop at a Kiowa camp. Rainey gets looked at. It's neat because the Kiowa healers say to Carrie that the poultice that she made actually was the most effective way to treat the fire ant bites on Rainey. And so that was cool. A good bonus, like a nice thumbs up to Carrie for her vast knowledge. And I really like this chapter where they're in the Kiowa camp because Carrie doesn't speak, obviously, their language. However, she's intrigued and wants to learn more about their culture. And she just kind of assimilates into her surroundings. So like a lot of the women are making food and stuff. She ends up holding a baby that's cutting teeth. She's able to soothe the baby and get him to sleep. And it talks about her sitting there holding the baby as it's passed out. And I just thought, like, it's so sweet. It's so gentle. It's such a gentle scene to think about. As she's getting this fussy baby to sleep, Eli comes up to her to tell her where they're going to be sleeping for the night. But before he even says anything, he looks over her shoulder and he studies this little baby's face. And again, I was like, it's so sweet. They go and check out their sleeping arrangements, and apparently all of them were supposed to sleep in one teepee, and Carrie asks like where the rest of the guys are, and then Eli tells her, oh, they have good friends, and so they're gonna stay with the good friends. Carrie's like, well, if you have good friends here amongst this tribe, I would not want you to miss out on a good time, because she's picking up what they're putting down. Like, they're going off and they're smooshing, right? Mm-hmm. She's implying that, and it's her, subtle way of being like, am I the only one that you're interested in? And he's like, I don't have good friends like that in this tribe, so I'm staying with you. It's cute. They get a chance to talk some more about their, families and whatnot. She talks about like her father's death and her siblings, and they're getting to know each other at a deeper level. And just as they're about to fall asleep, Eli tells her that it was his choice to stay behind with Carrie, and there's nowhere else he would rather be. The next day, they are back on the road with a slightly terrifying incident when a group of Apache show up, and Carrie goes off and hides in the bushes, and thank God she does. Because the outcome could have been totally different if they knew she would have been with these other men. The Apache ride off. She sees that some of them have like fresh scalps on them. They're getting closer to Santa Fe, and the weather starts getting really weird. The guys tell Carrie like there's probably a tornado brewing. So they're moving quick and they're trying to get where they can hide in these caverns. At one point, so they're outrunning it. I don't think a tornado hasn't touched down yet, but like the sky's starting to change color and the wind is just like blowing these trees halfway over. There's this big bolt of lightning and it strikes nearby. And Carrie at the time is riding one of Eli's horses. She falls off the horse and blacks out. Shortly after that, she wakes up and turns out she's probably got like a concussion, but she's doing pretty good, but she's a little bit dizzy and a little nauseated from the fall. They've made it to the caverns and Eli has kind of pulled Carrie off somewhere else where they can be a little more private. At one point, Carrie jokingly asks, Eli, are you flirting with me? And he's like, well, if you have to ask, I'm doing a terrible job. And then Carrie gets a little vulnerable and she says, men don't flirt with me. They find me intimidating, off-putting, that kind of thing. And then Eli counters with, well, who told you that you were intimidating? And she's like, well, I overheard what Titus was saying about me. And then also with all like the men doctors that I've worked with my entire life, I'm just really accustomed to men finding me intimidating, off-putting. Eli said, so old men and boys is like, that's who's telling you you're intimidating? And then he said, some men are blind and some are stupid and some are both. He's just it's so attractive to like a man not be intimidated by a woman with a brain, you know what I mean? So Carrie, unfortunately, the girl doesn't really have like dating experience. That wasn't really a thing that most women back in this time period did. She's like so flustered trying to figure out what Eli's intentions are. And she asks him, she's like, are you just trying to flirt with me because you want some like hanky-panky time? Like, is that all this is to you? This starts this weird back and forth between the two of them where Eli then asks her, like, well, is that what you imagine happening between us? She's to, kind of put up her wall a little bit. She's like, oh, no. Like, I don't think of that at all. Good thing Eli doesn't buy it. He realizes being friends with Carrie is like never going to be enough for him. He thinks of all the single men that are in Santa Fe and how they're going to like all be after Carrie whenever she gets there. And all they're going to do is like, they're going to want her just to be a housewife. And he's like, that's not suitable for this woman. And I love it. I freaking love it. Carrie has this, she's very stoic, but in some ways she's very stoic because she does have a real temper, a real anger. She's able to kind of act out explosively. And that's talked about more when you find out more about the traumatic things that happened to her to cause her to have that kind of anger. I think some of her stoicism comes from like if she gets too animated, like she's afraid of herself and she's afraid of men, like she doesn't trust men. And so she has to keep things like really bottled up. So Eli understands. He sees that Carrie would probably turn away every suitor that came after her, mainly because she doesn't think that she deserves kindness or love or affection. He's trying to get her to light up a little bit, and she's fallen asleep. So he pulls her into his lap as she's sleeping. She cracks an eye open and she says, it's you. He says, you were expecting someone else? Rainey? Miguel? She says, no, not either of them. Titus Hardy, maybe. And this made me, that line made me snort because I'm like, again, she's funny. This is probably one of the best ever that I've read, at least. One of the best discussions around smooshing. I'm just going to say smooshing because I don't want to get censored or whatever. Eli straight up tells her that he'd like to have smoosh with her. The way, like, he just says it. He says, yes, I want to. I would like to do that with you. We love a man who's straightforward. She asks nervously like if he's married, and of course he's not. And I think she already knows that, but she's just stalling here because she's so flustered. She doesn't really know how to navigate this. Eli takes her off guard because then he asks her if she'd like to get married. And Carrie doesn't really know how to respond. I think for her, she has a fear of being married and having to perform, marital duties. And so it doesn't explicitly state she's a virgin, but it's implied again through the way that it's written. But it's so nice because it doesn't make Carrie look like she's this child because she's a virgin. It's really respectfully written, and it doesn't paint her as this immature child. She's just a woman that's never had sex. I wish that more characters were written like this instead of this trope of she's a virgin, so she's young and dumb and doesn't know any of these things. I don't know. It gets so frustrating to read. This was honestly a breath of fresh air. So again, Eli assures her that he's definitely he wants to smash. She's like, okay. He admits that he doesn't think about much else as of lately. And then Eli states he isn't playing games with her. Maybe she just wants, to smash because she's human. Or maybe she truly wants him. Either way, just smashing and smooshing isn't going to cut it for them. He's like, it's not going to be a one-time thing. Like, we're going to want to do this more. And then he's like, I think we suit each other pretty well. So he's like, let me take the pressure off you. We could smoosh before we get married and see if we suit one another. Because you might find out that you really like this and you're comfortable with it and you're not as scared to get married. And he's like, and then, if we get married and things don't work out, then we will handle that when it approaches and we will figure it out together. If we have to go our own separate ways, that's fine. We'll figure this out. I just love how he could understand she was nervous and overwhelmed and wasn't sure how to really talk about any of this because she's never talked about this kind of stuff with anybody ever before. And he's mature enough. He doesn't belittle her for her inexperience. And he takes the pressure off and presents a solution that's fairly simple. Freaking love it. Even though initially they're just talking about sleeping with one another, admitting to her, like, I don't want to just sleep with you because I find you physically attractive. I want to share like an intimate moment with you because I like deeply admire you. One more thing that Carrie is nervous about was the whole kissing situation. And so she's like, can we like try that again? Because it was like pretty underwhelming the last time. And Eli's like, he thinks this is hilarious because he's like, I can definitely show you that I can do a better job. And I'm like, needless to say, they get the kissing thing figured out. But I should say, it's not overly explicit. The way it's written a little less dramatic. It's written with less detail than some of these more like romantic-y style books that I've been reading. But I'm like, this is almost like hotter the way it's written. We'll have to talk about this book too. So it's just a difference between a kissing scene in Fourth Wing versus in The Sweet Blue Distance. He tunnels a hand through my hair, cradling the back of my head, angling me for a deeper kiss, and my lips part eagerly. He takes the invitation, sliding his tongue along mine with expert teasing strokes that have me clutching at his chest, fisting the material of his shirt to pull him closer as desire dances up and down my spine. He tastes like, he tasted like that. I kiss him back with everything I have, sucking on his lower lip and scraping my teeth over him. Then you compare that to, into her ear, he said, now don't rush off before we figure out the kissing. So Carrie thought, this is the start. Eli turned her to face him, cupped her head in his hands and drew her close. Carrie wrapped her own hands around his wrists. Her breath came in a short gasp, then he was kissing her. A light kiss, the corner of her mouth, her lower lip, her chin, her nose. His kisses were gentle and sweet, and yet a fluttering began in the very center of her body, something odd and new, but somehow still familiar. It occurred to her that she could go her whole life and never be so aware of her own body as she was in this moment. She might live to be an old woman, remembering the taste of him, the smell of his skin, until even that much faded away. She could sacrifice this and the rest of what was to come, the things she understood in a superficial way, and tell herself it was the most rational, safest choice. Against her mouth, he whispered, should I stop? A breathy sound was all she could produce. She met his eyes and saw a vulnerability she hadn't imagined. No, she said, not quite yet. I don't know. It just feels a little more. I think the difference is like this scene and this book, the romance is focused on legitimate intimacy. This to me feels like I'm more invested in a way in this because I feel like these two have really gotten to know each other at an intimate level and they genuinely care about each other. It's not a lust for one another. Like, yes, they're attracted to each other, but it's not a hardcore lust. Versus in Fourth Wing, I mean, like, sure, I guess you could argue like they get to know each other and whatever, but like it's still like Violet over-sexualizes Xaden from the moment she sees him. I'm not even gonna pull out and read the part of like her description of Xaden. It made me laugh the first time I read it because it was so over the top. These two are like, I'm deeply attracted to you and I want to see where this goes. So I don't know, it just feels warranted and it feels earned, the intimacy there. Just before they get to Santa Fe, they make a stop in a small town and they get some food. Her and Eli have a brief moment where they talk about their relationship and they're like, well, how much are we going to reveal to people? Because they've already agreed. They've pretty much agreed, like, we're going to get married, but how much are we going to tell people? And I think it's cute. Again, they're talking about their relationship and they're not shy about it. Carrie's like, let's not be too explicit with like what we are as a couple. Until I can kind of get there and feel like test the waters and see what's going on. Let's wait a month and not say anything really explicit that we're going to get married because I need to like figure out who these people are. So Eli understands this and he agrees and that's what they're going to roll with. And it's really sweet because Carrie takes the time to confirm with Eli, like, I want to get married to you. And she's like, I don't need anyone else's approval or blessing. So I'm not holding us back because I'm hesitant to what our relationship is. I just know that people are really bigoted and I want to protect you and me. And I think that was really beautiful. And then he asks her, a month or 6 weeks of what? Acting like strangers? She shook her head at him. No, that would make both of us unhappy and it would be dishonest. But we could be two people who are attracted to one another, wanting to spend time together. Falling in love? It was a challenge, but she met it. Yes, her voice wobbled, and so she repeated herself more firmly. Yes, we love people that are straightforward. I need more of that. I need more of it. I really do. So Carrie arrives in Santa Fe, and girl hits the ground running. She immediately goes to Dr. Markham's residence. They make their introductions. It's awkward. It's concerning. Carrie can immediately tell that Dr. Markham is not healthy and that Mrs. Markham is also not quite right. Turns out Mrs. Markham has already had the baby and she's got the baby held to her. And she's like really possessive about the baby. Puppy. Hi, girl.
How'd you get so cute? How'd you get so cute, Pops?
This whole chapter was kind of like a whoosh to me, even as a reader. Like, I loved it because you felt just as taken off guard as Carrie did. So Mrs. Markham has already had this baby and she's not letting anybody see it, touch it. So Carrie's like, okay, I'm sensing already we've got some like postpartum depression. She's really possessive of the child. And, you know, spoilers here, but I am going to go into a little bit of this. Carrie finds the way that she's holding this child kind of odd. At their dinner, she gets a quick glance of the baby and sees that it's actually a doll. She's like, oh my, we're dealing with psychosis. We're not dealing with postpartum depression. It has escalated. Mind you, this is like her second or third stillborn, or I don't know if all of her children were stillborn or if Miss Carrie, but she'd lost like 2 or 3 kids up until this point. So this poor woman is like, they didn't have health. This was such and I was like surprised that this book took this route because there was no help for women at that time period, but you know that they still had issues like postpartum depression and then the psychosis type stuff. Carrie pulls Dr. Markham aside. She's like, yo, your wife is not okay. She's carrying around a baby doll. She thinks that baby doll is 100% real. She named the baby. What are you going to do for her? And he's like, I have no idea. I have no treatment plan. The only thing I can do for her is keep her drugged. I was kind of mad when I read that, but at the same time, he said the only other option for her was like putting her in an institution. And he's like, I'm not putting her in an institution. So I kind of give him credit for that, I guess. But Dr. Markham doesn't get many points because he's a trash bag. So this poor woman, instead of getting any help at all, she's just drugged and she becomes addicted to it. Now that Carrie's main objective of arriving in Santa Fe, she was supposed to be a midwife to Mrs. Markham. That's no longer a thing. There's no real child. So her roles switch a little bit. So now she'll primarily be working in the dispensary and being, a nurse to Dr. Markham, and then obviously attending all the births and deliveries around the Santa Fe area, and then providing her nursing skills. She's not like, oh, well, I guess I got to go home now. She's like, well, no, like, it's fine. I adjust. I will adjust to the situation. Carrie is living in the Markham residence, and she meets Lulu, which is their little daughter. I think she's like 7 or 8 years old. And Lulu's like in her bedroom when she wakes up, and she's like, hello. And so she's this like little bright ray of sunshine. But Carrie immediately can see that this poor little girl just wants attention because her parents don't pay attention to her at all. And so the housekeeper, Josepha, is basically like an honorary mother to this little girl. And so all the housekeeping type people and John, who works as an assistant in the dispensary, they all have tabs on Lulu. So even though Lulu's parents aren't super involved to pay attention to her, the rest of like the whole community kind of comes around her, and I love it. Dr. Markham takes Carrie around town and she runs some errands and she meets some people, and she's getting some attitude from people, and she's kind of like, I'm expecting it. Like, why would they trust me? So I appreciate her for having that maturity level and not getting on the defensive. That's nice to read. She meets some women that are pregnant and about to give birth, so she's putting some faces with the names and learning where things are in Santa Fe. Carrie has this weird interaction with Miriam Goldblum, who is a character that I think it's the first birth that she attends while she's in Santa Fe, and Miriam is also racist. She makes some like racist remarks to Carrie, and Carrie just shuts it down. After this like weird interaction with Miriam, she leaves the residence or the store. I think she was in a store. And Mr. Markham has like rushed back to the dispensary. So Carrie runs back to the dispensary herself and finds that there was like a really bad accident, and this guy ends up needing to have, I think it's like part of his leg amputated. She has to assist with that, and eventually this poor man does end up dying. In Carrie's first few days there, Eli has to take care of some business outside of town. He goes to visit his family. Eli writes her this letter, tells her, you need to go to Inigo and Violante. This is where they live, and they're the ones that are keeping your horse. They're also super trustworthy, reliable people. Go to them if you need anything at all. And then at the end of the letter, he calls her mi amor. And I'm like, oh, it's so cute. We love it. We love it. So he's like, I can't be there, but here are some people that can help you if you need help. And I really love his foresight. He's just considerate and thinking of her in this brand new environment, and her probably being scared. I love it. Carrie heads to the post office to mail some letters out to her family, and she runs into two bachelors who are, I don't know, they sound pretty annoying to me. Rob Ramsey and Jack Saracen. They're both young, well-dressed, handsome guys, but Carrie's kind of like, she's not feeling it. So they tell her, like, hey, are you going to go to the Fandango later this week? And she's like, oh, I don't really have time for dancing, even though we all know Carrie loves dancing. But she is, again, kind of like, what would I wear? So she's like, I would love to go dancing, but I'm so unprepared for all of the above. So she tells them kind of politely, she turns them down. There's a funny part where Carrie, throughout the day, she's tending to other patients, and she helps this mother figure out that her baby is having digestive issues because he brings up milk, but he never farts. And then Carrie makes she makes a note to herself, like, I'll have to make sure I tell Beto that I learned the Spanish word for fart, and he didn't teach me that. And that just made me crack up because, again, that's a little bit of Carrie's humor there. The remainder of the day after helping the little farty baby is her, like, all these women are coming in and out of the dispensary, and I love it because it's like everyone's like, ooh, there's a new midwife in town. So they're starting to come in and introduce her. They're checking her out. They're feeling her out. And she understands this. She's like, yeah, these people are they're going to be wary of me, and I understand that. And I love her, like, calm composure with being kind of put on the spot like that. After this jam-packed day, Carrie goes over to Inigo's stables to see Mimosa. It's been a heavy day for her. She's brought to tears when she sees her horse and she whistles for her, and Mimosa and Chico both come running, and she's emotional about that. And I'm like, girl, same. I love my animals, and when my animals want to be around me, it's such a heartwarming thing. You feel like on top of the world. So after she's briefly visiting with her four-legged friends, she goes over to Inigo and Violante's house, and I'm telling you, they're just like her grandparents. They like welcome her right into the house and make her feel at home. And one important detail to remember at this point, so I think Carrie's only been there for like a day or two, Dr. Markham straight up disappears. She can sense already that Inigo and Violante are trustworthy individuals, so she decides to tell them the situation going on with them. And Inigo is like, I'm gonna go out tomorrow morning and I'm gonna find Dr. Markham because this is ridiculous. Like, he's abandoning his duties as a doctor. So we're already, it was kind of weird to read because it was like really sudden. Like, all of a sudden, Dr. Markham is just like an unreliable, weird, absent character. So it felt just as jarring. Of course, this meeting with Inigo and Violante would not be complete without mentioning Eli. And Carrie asked them, like, do you know when he's going to be back from visiting his family? And they assure her, like, yeah, he's pretty upset about this delay, and he wants to get back as soon as possible too. And then on her way out the door, Violante tells Carrie that she's happy that they found each other. And I'm like, so Carrie attends her first labor and delivery, and that's Miriam Goldblum's baby. That's the lady that was like making some racist comments about somebody, and Carrie was like, no. She does a great job, delivers the baby safely, and that's her first experience there. She comes back to the Markham's residence after she delivers this baby and is still wondering like when Dr. Markham's going to show up again. So she goes into the house and is surprised that the placenta is filled with people, and Dr. Markham's there, and he's like all jovial, and Mrs. Markham is sitting next to him, and they're all eating, and they invite her to come eat with them. She's like, I'm so sorry, everybody. I'm so exhausted. I need to go lay down and rest. But Carrie is very put off by this interaction because he's like a different person than he was the other day. So within 24 hours, Carrie has delivered 2 babies, so she has been just working her tail off. She goes back to the dispensary after these births. It turns out that little Lulu has disappeared, and apparently this is a thing that Lulu does because she wants attention and she doesn't get it, and so she runs off when she's frustrated and wants someone to pay attention to her. Josepha and John, like, they're all just like, yeah, she does this. They suggested, like, hey, Carrie, why don't you go over to Inigo's house and see if she's over there? She does tend to like to go over there and hang out with those guys. Carrie takes off and she goes over there, and sure enough, she finds Lulu, and she tells Lulu, like, hey, everyone's looking for you. We're worried about you. She goes, well, are my parents looking for me? And she's like, no, no, but we are. And she gets mad and runs back off to the house. And so you kind of feel bad for this poor little girl. Violante takes this moment that Carrie's sitting there at their house and invites her to the fandango. This gets Carrie all flustered, and she goes back to the house and she speaks with Josepha, and she asks her, like, why are you so flustered right now? And then Carrie tells her, I've been invited to go to this fandango, but I don't have anything suitable to wear for the event. Josepha's just like, do not worry about that. We have got you covered. The next chapter is the fandango. Carrie, because she's a nice person, she agrees to a bunch of the single guys. They're like, yes, I'll dance with you. Yes, she's got like she's filling up that dance card, you know, because all the men are making eyes at her. Meanwhile, we get a little bit of POV switch. Go back. Eli has just gotten back in town. He knows the fandango is happening and decides that he's going to get himself cleaned up and he's going to head down there because he knows Carrie's there and he knows that the men are going to be after her. And he's like, I'm going to make my presence known. And then there's some details given that Eli is a good dancer because he grew up dancing in his mother's Pueblo. It's just part of their culture. The man can dance. We love it. From Eli's POV, he talks about Carrie comes alive when dancing. Dancing, Carrie Ballantyne came alive. The sight had robbed him of breath, and with that, it was clear to him that it didn't matter how little they had in common. He was on the brink of falling in love, and for once the idea didn't frighten him. Now he walked into the fort to claim Carrie for himself. So cute. Carrie's taking a break from dancing with somebody. I don't remember who. We don't care. We don't care about the other dudes. They're unimportant. She says to Violante, you don't want me to dance with the postmaster? Raising her voice to be heard. Forget the postmaster, Violante shouted back. This one coming up now? This one you should dance with. Carrie turned and saw a man approaching, walking through the dancers as if they didn't exist. A very unladylike sound came from her throat, and then Eli was in front of her. And then Violante, she says to Eli, lento como el burro, which I think translates roughly to he says slow as a burro, as a donkey. Eli didn't even look in Violante's direction. Instead, he took Carrie's hand, drew her to her feet. He lowered his head to speak into her ear, his voice steady and clear and low enough to drown out the noise. Is she right? Tell me, Kierda. Did I stay away too long? He's such a flirt. So now we have to get back into the mundane aspect of the story. Carrie gets her chance to confront Dr. Markham about his time being gone. And it's a weird interaction. He doesn't apologize. He doesn't have an explanation. He has nothing to say other than just being mad at Carrie for being direct with him. Carrie asks if she can examine Mrs. Markham herself, and he's basically like, sure, just so you know, she keeps a fillet knife next to her beds, and she doesn't really like other people, so let me know how that goes. It's really condescending and weird. It's so weird because, like, it's almost unjustified because they don't know each other well enough to have this much disdain towards one another. But because Carrie is upfront, I mean, he's threatened by that because he does have something to hide. And I don't think that he wants people to find out. And Carrie's kind of like, I'm going to find out what's going on here. So the way that Carrie gets her foot in the door with Mrs. Markham is she takes Mrs. Markham her laudanum. She's trying to build trust with Mrs. Markham. She's like, how about, what if we record your birth story? And at first Mrs. Markham's like, no, I don't want to do that. And then she's like, well, maybe I'll agree to that. And we can only have one copy of it. That's that. So Carrie's like, that's fine. So she uses this as an opportunity to try and get closer to Mrs. Markham in effort to help her because truly she needs help. And no one, just drugging her isn't going to solve the problem. Meanwhile, at the same time, Carrie's over there risking her life. Eli is going through his home and he's preparing it for Carrie. And it's so freaking cute. He goes out and he buys new cooking utensils, pots, pans, shelves, and he gets the house organized. So Eli, being just kind of the bachelor that he is, he doesn't really cook that much. So he goes over to Rosita and she feeds him. This character warns Eli that things are not safe in the Markham house, but again, no one's really expounding on that very much, and it just adds to this mystery of like, what the heck is going on with these people? He takes this information, he's like, I'm gonna have to bring this up to Carrie. So he leaves Rosita's place, and he sees Carrie. Carrie is leaving the brothel, and at first he's like, girl, why are you at the brothel? And then he's like, oh wait, women in the brothel have babies too. And so instead of making some like stupid misunderstanding and like being mad at her or whatever, he's just like, oh yeah, that makes sense. He knows that Carrie is wearing a sunbonnet and is about to walk by without seeing him, and he just doesn't like that idea. So it's cute because the writing, it takes you back to when they were riding to Santa Fe. And apparently while they were on the trail, they started doing like bird call impressions, and they would be like, there'd be competitions to see like who could make the best bird impression. As Carrie is walking down the street, she hears a finch call. She's like, oh, it's a finch. And then she's like, wait a second, I've never seen a finch in my time here in Santa Fe. Like, I don't think. And then like it dawns on her, and she was like, and so she remembers the bird impression thing, and she starts looking around, and then she sees Eli like off in kind of the shadows, and he just smiles and winks at her and like bails out. I just thought it was really cute because he's like, I know you're busy, but I just want to let you know I'm thinking about you, girl. And poor Carrie, girl doesn't get a break. She then has to go attend a labor and delivery of not a human but a burro. So people were like, hey, babies, you can help out my burro, right? But she does. She gets the foal turned around the right direction. And so like Carrie is a midwife, a nurse, and now also veterinarian. Carrie is on her way back from this ranch that she went and delivered the burro at, and she's covered in afterbirth and blood, and she tried to clean her hands off like as much as she possibly could. She's still like pretty gross. Eli finds out he was supposed to go walking with her that evening. He goes to pick her up, and they're like, hey, she's attending another birth. They tell her where she went, and so he rides out to go get her. As they're riding back to town, they discuss the issue with Dr. Markham, and they make a plan. It's not the most ideal plan, but they do make a plan that if things get really weird, Carrie she needs to run. She needs to get out of the house. Here's the next big plot point. They arrive back at the Markham's residence, and something's off. Clearly something's not right. There's no lights, no lamps have been left lit. The house is completely dark, and this isn't usually what happens at this time of night, especially when they know that Carrie is out, and they would leave a light on for her to come back to. They go into the house. They find Dr. Markham is basically incapacitated. He can't communicate, but he's trying to, and Mrs. Markham is dead. So it turns out, fast forward a little bit, through all the drama, that there's lots of drama. It's a pretty hefty part of the story, and it's sad. Dr. Markham ends up being most likely diabetic, and he's now dying from it because, again, at that time there was nothing you could do if you were diabetic. So now that Dr. Markham and Mrs. Markham are gone, Lulu's just left. She's orphaned. And so Mrs. Markham wrote Carrie a letter, and it takes Carrie a few days to read it because she's afraid of what's in this letter, but she's shocked when she reads the letter and finds out that Mrs. Markham left Carrie in charge of Lulu until Lulu's extended family can come and collect her. But mind you, these letters that have been sent, like, it takes months for them to get where they need to go. So Carrie is responsible for Lulu for the time being. While all this is happening, Carrie is still working. Like, she's still attending births. She's still working in the dispensary. Carrie attends a first-time mother in labor, and Eli goes with her, and he shows her the house, and Carrie tells him, like, hey, this is the first time delivery, so you don't need to stick around. Like, it's gonna be a while. Hours go by, and she delivers the baby, and it was safe, and it was a happy delivery. And she goes outside to leave and finds that Eli did not take her advice, and he was there the entire time. So he stayed behind and to sit with the husband of the woman that was giving birth, because he noticed that the husband was just nervous and upset about his wife being in pain. And so he offered this man just the comfort of his presence. And I'm like, that is so, so sweet. Now that Dr. Markham and Mrs. Markham are gone, they've both been buried. Their funerals are been done. Carrie is approached by Mr. Bixby, who is the Markham's lawyer, and he comes to tell her some unfortunate news that the money that was supposed to be So Carrie was supposed to be given $50 a month to pay for Lulu's expenses. Mr. Bixby straight up tells her, like, yeah, about that, there's no money. This man died in debt. He doesn't own this house. He's in the red. Carrie takes this news as, I mean, what else is she gonna do? Mr. Bixby says to her, because the parents are gone, the church will take Lulu in as an orphan. And then Carrie's like, oh, no. Like, I was given guardianship over her until her family comes to collect her, and I will do that, regardless if I get money or not. We love to see a confident, strong woman stand firm and stand up for what's right. Carrie she's worried approaching the wedding. She's nervous, and she's unfortunately right now, she's not being very forthcoming to Eli, but basically what ends up happening is she's nervous about talking about the wedding and planning for it because she's nervous about how Eli's parents are going to react to her. I think Carrie's nervous because too, like, she is white and his family is not, and she's worried that this family won't like her or trust her because of that. And, you know, that's valid. That's a valid concern because she's already getting a bunch of, like, prejudice, racist comments thrown at her as it is. Once again, Carrie is off at the Goldblum house, and she is helping another Goldblum daughter deliver a baby. She gives birth to a healthy baby girl, and it all went well, and she's exhausted, and it's just after midnight. And so Eli had walked her there, but then he went home to go to bed. But he must have left a note for Mr. Goldblum to take Carrie back to his house when she was done. So Carrie's, like, pretty tired, and she realizes, like, as they're walking, that she's not being taken to the Markham residence, she's being taken to Eli's residence. Carrie walks into Eli's house, and he's left her, there's like a little light is left on for her. It's like dampered down pretty far, but enough light that she can see. And so she walks into the house, and she's like a nervous wreck. She's like, I can't believe that I'm walking into this man's house at midnight. Like, you have to remember, like, this would have been a fairly scandalous thing to do. Right, Pops? So Carrie sits there and debates with herself. She debates laying down and sleeping right where she stands. And then she's like, this is absolute utter foolishness on my behalf. So she's frustrated by her own nervousness. She goes into Eli's chamber and closes the door. And he's asleep, and she's unsure if she should wake him or just climb into bed. So as she's sitting here having this internal conflict, she turns to walk away, and Eli reaches around and grabs her wrist and, like, yanks her back. And he's like, what is it that you're doing here? So I'm sure you can imagine what's going to happen from here on out. They do sleep together for the first time. It's a simple scene. It's not overdone. It's not overly dramatic. It's just sweet. And Eli, again, is very respectful of her, and there is none of this, she's a virgin, so she's, like, clueless type stuff. It doesn't paint her that way, and I appreciate that, again, because I get so sick and tired of reading, like, this infantilization of women that are virgins. I hate reading it. And this book did not do that, and I was like, oh, thank God. Nathan finally makes it to Santa Fe. At this point, I don't know how far. I think it's been at least a month. I think Carrie has been in Santa Fe for at least a month at this point. And finally Nathan arrives. So and he arrives before the stagecoach that Eva and Beto are on. He started to ride out. I think he rode out by himself because he was like, he just wanted to see Carrie. So Nathan comes, and she fills him in and is like, by the way, I'm getting married to Eli. And he was like, duh, I figured that was going to happen. So the next day is the wedding, and that they're doing their wedding at his mother's Pueblo. It's neat because as you're reading, you get a little bit of the POV of both characters again. And Eli is thinking to himself that Carrie fits into his world because she understands what it is to be part of a tribe. She wants to belong, and she wants to be in this community with these people, and that he doesn't have to worry about her passing judgment or criticism or try to teach these people because she knows better. She doesn't do that with any of her patients that he's seen so far. So as he's watched her be a midwife and a nurse, he's confident, like, she's going to fit in with his family very well. At last, Carrie has to face Alta Garcia. That would be Eli's mom. And so she meets both his parents. At first, Alta Garcia is like, she seems pretty stiff and not super welcoming. Eli takes Carrie's hand and he leads her up to his parents. After just like a moment or two, Alta Garcia ends up smiling at her, and it's just like it's like the tension is relieved, and his family they just kind of welcome her into. So the next chapter after their wedding is, a lot of times you would expect like, oh, now the wedding night, now we're gonna have a big smooshing scene. There really isn't one, but there is like a really beautiful, again, a conversation that happens between Eli and Carrie, and Carrie gets vulnerable. And she admits that she's curious about sleeping with him more. She's like curious about learning more about like what she likes, what he likes, that kind of thing. And again, it's just like a really mature conversation. I think it's written beautifully. And she says that she understands the anatomy because as a nurse, she had to train and understand all the anatomy of a human being. But she was like, as for like the more subtleties and intricacies of this act, she knows nothing about it because no one talks about it, which again, that's kind of how it was in that time period. So Carrie's being vulnerable and admitting like, I'm curious about doing more of this with you. And then he tells her, I'm also curious and want to do this with you. And then he says, Carrie, don't you realize how happy you make me? Out of my head happy. And more softly, everything about you suits me and I'm just as curious as you are. Give me more of it. Give me more of it. I love it. I love it. Absolutely. Like, give me more. Eva arrives back in Santa Fe, and we're glad to have her back because I honestly missed her, and I do appreciate her coming back into the story. Again, she's just as reliable and loyal as she was before. And with Eva's arrival, a certain somebody also turns back up, and that's Canty Chatham that we mentioned way back when. So to relatively sum up the rest of this book, Canty Chatham is back. She is related to Mrs. Markham, and she's come to collect. She thinks she's going to get this big investment now that Mrs. Markham is dead, because as it turns out, they're half siblings or something along those lines. So she comes back to collect, finds out there's nothing to collect. But then, interestingly, another plot twist is Lulu is the only child left of the Markhams. So it turns out that Canty's father, so also Mrs. Markham's father, he passed away and left his inheritance to the surviving grandchildren. Well, Miss Canty, she didn't have any of her own kids, and Mrs. Markham only had one. So this giant inheritance has been left to Lulu. Canty is coming out to try and she wants to be Lulu's guardian to get the inheritance because she's shady F. Because remember, she hates children. We went over this. This is another big part, like the last part of this book, is it's just very messy with dealing with all that, because then it also turns out that Canty has been working, she's seduced the postmaster, and now she's stealing letters and correspondences in order to keep the judge and like law enforcement there out of the loop as to like what the actual, like what stuff was left to who. So that's mail fraud. So that's another big federal crime. Inigo, because he's a great loving grandfather, he figures out, he and John, I think John lives in the same building or whatever as where Canty is staying, and they somehow find out that Canty has been stealing all these letters. And so Inigo breaks into the hotel room and finds all these letters in a top drawer of a dresser, and he takes all of them and he delivers them directly to the judge that's handling this case. And so the judge calls them all in, and it's basically like, hey, this whole court case is now basically closed because we now know that Canty Chatham is up to no good trying to steal this child's inheritance. But also conveniently, Canty Chatham has now, she's on the run, because she realized, I would assume she probably went back to her room and realized that all the letters that she had stolen are no longer in her dresser. So she's making a run for it with the postmaster, a little Bonnie and Clyde type moment, you know? The judge tells them, basically the case is closed. Carrie is still in charge of Lulu until her extended family arrived to collect her, which, by the way, they had written correspondence saying they were coming for Lulu, but that was some of the letters that were kept away that were stolen. It's very messy. There's lots going on. There's so much good dialogue and details that are added. It's funny because the judge hires Titus Hardy and Miguel and Rainey to be the men to go after Canty, and we just know they're gonna get her. So we get this really cute interaction at the end of the book where Eli and Carrie run into the guys and they're like, what? You guys are married now? Like no one saw it coming. And it's just cute. I loved it. The epilogue of the book is Carrie finally gets a chance to read the 3 letters that had been stolen from her. The last one was from her mom, and that was my favorite. It was my favorite one to read. It was just really sweet. And her mom says to her, "You are the daughter of strong women and equal to whatever challenges you meet. Missteps are inevitable, but you will find your way." That roughly is The Sweet Blue Distance. It's so good. This is a 5-star read for me, and I do not give 5 stars out very willingly. So again, I didn't go into every specific thing with this book because there's honestly too much, and I highly recommend you go read this yourself. There's some pretty heavy topics that this book touches on. There's an intriguing, almost, it's kind of a subplot line with Carrie and her sister Martha's death. I didn't even get into that one. Thank you everybody for listening to my first ever book review. I'm gonna try to do better moving forward. This was a really hefty book for me to start on. Don't mind Poppy, she's scratching her beak off on the floor. Come here, Pops. Come here. So yes, thank you for listening to our little chit chat on The Sweet Blue Distance, and highly recommend reading it yourself, because I don't think I quite did it justice. It is great. Well, I hope to see you guys all again in my next video, and subscribe and leave comments. And this is my first video. I don't have a nice intro outro figured out yet. We'll get there. I'll see you guys all in the next one. Toodaloo.